Have you ever felt that pit in your stomach, like something's wrong, but you ignore it anyway? That's exactly what happened to me after a simple family dinner. I left my phone on the table, thinking it was harmless, but what happened next changed everything. The waitress locked the door, whispered, "You need to see this, but promise me you won't pass out," and showed me something I never expected. What my own son did on that hidden camera made me drop to my knees and realize the truth I never wanted to face. I should have known something was wrong the moment my chest tightened, for no reason at that dinner table. Not pain instinct, the kind that doesn't knock, just barges in and rearranges your insides. Mothers learn early to listen to that voice, the quiet warning that hums beneath laughter and clinking glasses. But I ignored it. I smiled. I passed the bread. I let myself believe that this dinner meant reconciliation. That time had softened the sharp edges between me and my son. I told myself this was progress. I was wrong. The restaurant was warm, polished, pretending to be welcoming. Soft lighting, fake smiles, the kind of place families choose when they want to look normal. My son sat across from me, relaxed, confident, tapping his fingers against his glass like he owned the room. He barely looked at me when I spoke. That alone should have told me everything. When a child stops looking at his mother's eyes, it's because guilt has taught him where not to stare. I laughed when he joked. I nodded when he spoke about his life. I ignored how every sentence felt rehearsed, like lines memorized for a play where I was the only audience member who didn't know the ending. My gut twisted tighter and tighter, but I kept eating. Years of survival had trained me well. Swallow discomfort, call it peace. Halfway through the meal, I felt that old familiar fear creep in, the same fear I had felt years ago when he first started changing. When warmth turned to calculation. When affection became leverage. When I realized I had raised someone who knew exactly where my weakest places were and had learned to aim. I excused myself to the restroom once, just to breathe. I stared at my reflection and told myself I was imagining things. "You're paranoid," I whispered. "He's your son. He wouldn't hurt you." That lie tasted bitter, but I swallowed it anyway. The dinner ended with polite hugs and promises to do this again. He left first. Didn't wait for me. Didn't look back. I reached into my bag for my phone and felt nothing. My stomach dropped. The table. I had left it on the table. When I walked back into the dining area, the noise seemed louder, sharper. Every laugh felt fake now, every clatter a warning. The waitress, young, nervous, eyes too alert for someone just doing her job, caught my arm before I reached the table. She whispered, her voice shaking, "Please don't panic. But you can't go back out there." I laughed, confused. "I just forgot my phone." Her grip tightened. Her face drained of color. "They already left, but please, come with me." She locked the door behind us. Actually locked it. My heart slammed so hard I thought I might pass out right there on the kitchen tile. No one locks doors unless there's danger on the other side. "There's a camera," she said quickly, almost tripping over her words. "Above your table." I wasn't supposed to look. But I heard what they said after you went to the restroom. And then I saw the footage. My blood went cold. "What did my son do?" I asked. The words scraped my throat. She hesitated. Then she said the sentence that broke something permanent inside me. "I've worked here 4 years. I've seen cheating. I've seen theft. I've never seen someone plan something so cruel and smile while doing it." That was when the nightmare fully woke up. In that moment, every memory rewrote itself. Every offhand comment he'd made. Every time he'd accused me of overreacting. Every time he'd reminded me how much I owed him. The gut feeling wasn't sudden, it was ancient. It had been screaming for years. I realized then that the dinner hadn't been about healing. It was a performance. A setup. A final act before the curtain fell on my dignity. I felt sick but also painfully clear. There is a specific terror that comes from realizing your own child has crossed a line not out of anger, but strategy. Rage burns fast. Strategy is patient. Strategy waits for the perfect moment, like a family dinner in a crowded restaurant with cameras running. My knees weakened, but my mind sharpened. The woman I used to be, the one who apologized too quickly, trusted too deeply, loved too blindly, she was fading. In her place stood someone colder, steadier, and far more dangerous. The waitress hadn't shown me anything yet, but I already knew. I knew because a mother always knows when her child stops seeing her as human and starts seeing her as an obstacle. And as my heart pounded in that locked room, one truth settled deep into my bones: whatever was on that video wasn't just betrayal. It was a declaration of war. And this time, I wasn't going to lose. She didn't look like a hero. Heroes never do at first. She looked like a girl trying to pay rent, hair tied too tight, apron stained with the exhaustion of double shifts and thankless smiles. The kind of woman the world trains to stay quiet. The kind of woman who knows exactly how disposable she is to management. And yet, she was shaking, not with fear for herself, but with urgency for me. After she locked the door, she leaned against it like she needed the wood to hold her upright. Her eyes darted once, twice, as if the walls themselves might betray us. That was when I understood the cost of what she was doing. Cameras don't just record customers. They record staff. One wrong move, one unauthorized playback, and she could lose everything. Still, she stayed. "I wasn't eavesdropping," she said quickly, defensively. "I swear. But when you went to the restroom, your son leaned forward." His voice dropped. That's when I knew something wasn't right. I didn't interrupt her. I couldn't. My body was locked in place, but my ears were burning. Every word she spoke felt like a nail being carefully, deliberately hammered into a coffin I hadn't known was being built. "He told the others to relax," she continued. "Said, just stick to the plan. She never checks the footage." And then they laughed, not nervous laughter. Confident, like men who already knew they'd won. Men, plural. That word landed harder than anything else. This wasn't impulsive cruelty. This was organized, rehearsed, shared. She swallowed hard. "I've seen a lot working here. People cheat. People lie. People humiliate each other when they think no one's watching. But this was different. They were calm. Calculated." He kept glancing up at the camera above your table. I closed my eyes. That camera. The one I'd never noticed. The one he had. "I shouldn't have looked," she whispered. But after they left, I checked. I needed to know if my instincts were right. That sentence hit me like a mirror. Instincts. Hers had spoken too, and unlike me, she listened. She turned the monitor toward me but didn't press play yet. Her hand hovered, trembling. "Before I show you," she said, "you need to understand something. Once you see this, you won't be able to unsee it. And I don't know what you'll do after." But I couldn't live with myself if I stayed quiet. That was the moment I understood her bravery. True courage isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It shows up as a choice between comfort and conscience, and chooses pain. "I know I could get fired," she went on. "Sud, blacklisted. But my mom, she trusted the wrong people too. And no one warned her. I promised myself if I ever saw something like that again, I wouldn't stay silent." Her voice cracked on the word again. In that locked room, two women stood on opposite sides of age, status, and life experience, but bound by the same unspoken truth. Women are taught to endure quietly, and punished when we refuse. She wasn't doing this because she knew me. She was doing it because she recognized something familiar. The look of a woman being set up by people who believed her love made her weak. She finally pressed play. And as the screen flickered to life, I realized something chilling. The waitress wasn't just risking her job. She was handing me power. Truth is the most dangerous currency there is. And she was placing it directly into my shaking hands. In a world that constantly asks women to mind their business, keep the peace, and let things go, she chose disruption. She chose truth. And because of that choice, everything that followed became inevitable. The video started harmlessly. That was the most evil part of it. Me laughing. Me leaning forward, listening. Me reaching across the table the way mothers do without thinking, open, unguarded, familiar. I barely recognized myself. She looked hopeful. She looked proud. She looked like a woman who still believed love could fix anything. Then I stood up and walked out of frame toward the restroom. And that's when my son changed. His shoulders relaxed. His smile sharpened. He leaned back in his chair like a man slipping into his real skin. The warmth drained from his face and was replaced by something colder, amusement. He leaned toward the others and said, clear as day, "Okay. Showtime." My breath caught. One of the men laughed. Another pulled out his phone. My son gestured upward, straight at the camera. He knew exactly where it was. He'd planned this. "Just make sure you send me the clip," he said casually. "I want to see her face when she realizes." Realizes what? They started talking over each other, mocking, dissecting me like prey. He replayed moments from my life, private moments, twisting them into jokes. My sacrifices became punchlines. My fears became entertainment. Then he said the sentence that shattered something primal inside me. "She thinks I brought her here to reconnect." He sneered. "Truth is, I needed proof. Proof she's unstable. Once this goes public, she won't be able to touch what's coming to me." The room spun. They discussed it openly. How the footage would be edited. How my reactions could be framed. How easily people believe a concerned son over an emotional mother. They talked about lawyers, about leverage, about how I'd be handled. I watched my own child orchestrate my destruction with the patience of a predator. This wasn't anger. This wasn't resentment. This was ambition without conscience. When I returned to the table in the video, they switched instantly. Smiles back on. Masks flawless. He reached for my hand, squeezing it gently, like a loving son. I flinched in real time watching it. The contrast was unbearable. That's when my knees gave out. I collapsed onto the floor of that locked room. The weight of the truth pressing the air from my lungs. The waitress knelt beside me, but I barely felt her. My mind was somewhere else, rewriting every memory, every warning sign I'd ignored. This wasn't just betrayal. It was exploitation. He had weaponized my motherhood against me. He had studied me, learned my soft places, and decided they were liabilities to be removed. The video ended with him looking directly into the camera as I stood to leave. He smiled. That smile told me everything. He thought this was over. He thought the story was finished. But what he didn't understand, what men like him never understand, is that women who survive betrayal don't break. They transform. As I pulled myself up from the floor, something settled inside me, cold, precise, unshakable. The footage hadn't destroyed me. It had armed me. He wanted a war built on lies and humiliation. I would give him one built on truth, and this time, the camera would be watching him. Humiliation isn't always loud. Sometimes it's planned quietly, politely, with menace on the table and smiles carefully rehearsed. That's what made it so lethal. I understood that only after the shock wore off and the meaning of what I'd seen began to sharpen. This wasn't a moment of cruelty. It was a strategy. Public humiliation, designed not to explode, but to seep, to stain, to follow me into rooms I hadn't even entered yet. They had chosen the restaurant for a reason. Neutral ground, respectable, middle class enough to look harmless, upscale enough to feel credible. A place where cameras ran constantly, where laughter sounded normal, where no one would question why a mother was emotional over dinner with her son. Emotion was the trap. They needed me open, soft, reacting. Every tear, every smile, every nervous laugh, raw material to be edited, cropped, weaponized. I replayed the footage in my head, not just what was said, but how it was said, the ease of it, the confidence. My son hadn't been improvising. He was following a script written long before the bread basket hit the table. The humiliation wasn't meant to happen in the restaurant. That was just the recording studio. The real stage was everywhere else: social circles, legal rooms, family gatherings, court filings. Concerned son records unstable mother. That was the headline he was building. That was the narrative. The footage would never be shown whole. Context would be removed like organs from a body. Reactions isolated, silence reframed as guilt, confusion labeled instability, love rebranded as obsession. What cut deepest wasn't that he wanted to humiliate me. It was that he understood exactly how humiliation works. He knew it doesn't need shouting. It needs witnesses. It needs plausibility. It needs people saying, "Well, Maybe there's something to it. That's when I realized the dinner hadn't been about me at all. I was a prop. The audience was everyone who would see the edited version later, friends who would pull back slowly, colleagues who would lower their voices, relatives who would choose distance over discomfort. Public humiliation is never about one moment. It's about social exile. He wanted to isolate me without ever laying a hand on me. That's the cleanest kind of violence. The kind that leaves no bruises and no fingerprints, only doubt. The cruelty of it settled into my chest like wet cement. I thought about how carefully he'd behaved before that night. How he'd let months pass. How he'd allowed hope to regrow just enough to make the fall devastating. This was not impulsive revenge. This was patience sharpened into a blade. And then there was the detail that haunted me most. He had chosen a public place so that my humiliation would feel earned. As if being watched made it legitimate. As if cameras could turn cruelty into evidence. As if the presence of strangers somehow made betrayal fair. I remembered how I'd fixed my hair that evening. How I'd chosen my words carefully. How I'd wanted to look like a good mother. The irony nearly crushed me. Everything I'd done to appear stable, loving, reasonable, that was exactly what he needed. A convincing before makes the after believable. I began to understand how many times women before me had been dismantled this way. Not with fists, but with footage. Not with screams, but with stories told by people society already trusts more. Sons, husbands, professionals, men who speak calmly while planning devastation. The humiliation wasn't just meant to embarrass me. It was meant to strip me of authority, to turn my voice into noise, to make every future word I spoke sound like defense instead of truth. Once that happens, you're no longer a person, you're a problem. That's when grief turned into something else. Not rage. Rage is loud and reckless. This was colder, more deliberate. I felt it settle behind my eyes like focus, because public humiliation only works if you don't see it coming. Once you see the machinery, it loses its power. I saw everything then, the timing, the witnesses, the narrative arc. And I understood something my son didn't say. Humiliation cuts both ways. Cameras don't belong to one side. Stories don't stay obedient. And truth has a way of spreading in directions you don't expect. He thought he was exposing me. What he was really doing was teaching me how he thinks, how he plans, how far he's willing to go when he believes he's smarter than everyone else. Public humiliation requires arrogance. It assumes control, it assumes silence. It assumes the person being humiliated will shrink, hide, apologize, or disappear. He assumed wrong. By the time I stood up from that locked room, the shame he'd planned for me no longer fit. Shame belongs to secrecy. And there would be no secrecy anymore. Not for him. Not for anyone who laughed at that table. Not for anyone who believed a story without asking who benefited from it. He wanted me small in front of an audience. Instead, he had handed me the blueprint of his own exposure. And humiliation, I learned that night, is only permanent when you accept it. I didn't. Silence had once been my survival skill. I learned it young, perfected it over decades. Silence kept peace. Silence avoided conflict. Silence made people comfortable. Silence let wounds heal without witnesses. Or so I thought. That night taught me the truth: silence doesn't heal betrayal, it feeds it. And I was done feeding anything that tried to consume me. When I left that restaurant, I didn't cry in the parking lot. I didn't call anyone for comfort. I didn't collapse into the familiar posture of a woman apologizing for being hurt. Something inside me had shifted too far for that. I walked to my car steady, spine straight, breath controlled. Broken women move differently. I was not broken anymore. I was awake. Refusing to stay broken isn't dramatic. It's quiet at first. It begins with a decision so small it feels insignificant. I will not explain myself. I will not beg to be believed. I will not soften the truth to protect people who sharpened lies against me. That decision changed everything. For the first time, I didn't rush to repair the relationship. I didn't ask myself what I could have done differently. I didn't carry the burden of someone else's cruelty like it was my responsibility to make it lighter. I let the weight fall where it belonged. And then came the harder part, refusing to stay silent. Silence had been my camouflage. Breaking it meant exposure. It meant risking judgment, disbelief, and the familiar accusation, "Why now? Why didn't you say something sooner?" As if timing determines truth. As if endurance equals consent. I understood something crucial then. People who benefit from your silence will always frame your voice as inconvenient. They don't fear lies, they fear clarity. I began speaking carefully, not emotionally, not to convince but to document. I wrote things down. Dates, wordings. I didn't vent, I recorded. I didn't accuse, I observed. Emotion clouds memory, but facts sharpen it. I let the facts speak in my place. Every time doubt tried to creep in, I returned to the footage in my mind, not to torture myself, but to ground myself. That smile, that certainty, that belief that I would stay quiet forever. Remembering it hardened my resolve. Refusing to stay broken also meant confronting the grief I'd avoided for years. Not grief for the relationship, but for the illusion. The illusion that love alone could redeem someone who saw empathy as weakness. I mourned the son I thought I had raised, and I let myself accept the man he had chosen to become. Acceptance wasn't forgiveness. It was clarity, and clarity is dangerous to people who rely on confusion. I stopped filtering my words to protect other people's comfort. I stopped shrinking my presence to avoid being labeled too much. Women are taught early that silence is grace. I learned that silence is often just fear dressed up as politeness. When I spoke, I didn't shout, I didn't plead, I stated. Calmly, precisely, with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing the truth doesn't need decoration. Some people pulled away. That was expected. Silence makes people feel safe. Truth makes them choose sides. I let them choose. I didn't chase anyone who needed my pain to be quieter for their peace to stay intact. What surprised me was who leaned in. Women who had watched quietly for years. People who had sensed something was wrong but never had proof. Truth is gravity. Once released, it pulls hidden things into the open. Refusing to stay silent didn't make me loud. It made me unignorable. I learned that brokenness isn't the absence of strength, it's the postponement of it. And once strength arrives, it doesn't ask permission. By the time I finished speaking, I wasn't asking to be believed. I knew I was. Revenge doesn't have to scream to be devastating. The most effective kind whispers, waits, and lets people destroy themselves with their own words. I didn't want chaos. I wanted accuracy. I didn't want pain for pain's sake. I wanted exposure. The kind that can't be undone, explained away, or blamed on misunderstanding. So I did nothing. At least, that's what it looked like. Silence, when chosen deliberately, becomes a weapon. While they assumed I was licking my wounds, I was mapping behavior. Watching reactions. Letting arrogance bloom unchecked. People who believe they've won always grow careless. I let them. I gathered everything. Not just the footage but the context around it. Messages. Timelines. Contradictions. I studied how narratives are built and where they fracture. Lies always require maintenance. Truth just waits. I didn't confront my son. I let him talk. People reveal more when they believe they're in control. I let him believe that. Every overconfident comment, every subtle threat disguised as concern, I noted them all. Then I did the one thing he never expected. I gave him space to speak publicly. Not directly, strategically. I knew exactly where his credibility mattered most, exactly which rooms he relied on respect to protect him. I didn't attack him there, I simply placed the truth within reach. Documentation. Full footage. Unaided, accompanied by neutral timelines and third-party verification. No accusations. No emotional framing, just reality. Revenge becomes unassailable when it looks like transparency. People watched the footage and saw what I saw. Not a villain monologuing, but a man relaxed in cruelty, comfortable, confident, certain no consequences were coming. That certainty was his undoing. Those involved scrambled. Explanations conflicted, stories shifted. The calm confidence cracked. Nothing exposes a lie faster than pressure applied evenly from all sides. I didn't gloat. I didn't comment. I didn't defend myself. I let silence do the work this time. Not as surrender but as a mirror. The fallout wasn't explosive. It was surgical. Trust eroded. Doors quietly closed, invitations stopped coming. People who once laughed along began distancing themselves, afraid association might stain them too. That's the thing about intelligent revenge, it doesn't announce itself. It rearranges reality until the guilty recognize the landscape no longer favors them. My son tried to regain control, he couldn't. Control depends on secrecy. Once exposed, it evaporates. Every attempt he made to spin the story only pulled more attention to the original truth. The more he spoke, the clearer everything became. I didn't need to destroy him. I let him introduce himself. In the end, revenge wasn't the satisfaction I expected. There was no rush, no triumph, just closure. The kind that settles quietly into your chest and lets you breathe again. What I gained wasn't power over him. It was freedom from him. Cold revenge doesn't come from hatred. It comes from precision, from patience, from knowing that truth, when handled correctly, outlasts every lie built to bury it. He thought the cameras were his weapon. He never realized they were mine. What happened that night taught me one thing: betrayal can come from the people you love most, but the truth is always stronger than lies. I chose not to stay silent, not to stay broken, and to expose what was really happening. If you've ever felt betrayed, or if you believe in the power of truth and courage, then don't miss the rest of these stories. Subscribe now and turn on notifications, because some truths are too shocking to stay hidden.